Welcome to Redirect Immigration Law and Perspectives, a weekly dive into the world of immigration law and its human consequences. I'm your host, Stephen Robbins. This week, we're joined by Susan Church. She's an immigration attorney extraordinaire in Boston. She's a really great attorney. She was first on the show because she was involved in the airport activism of Muslim Ban 1.0, and she's sort of back at it again. You may have heard some stories out of Boston of some Iranian students who were deported by Border Patrol at the airport. They got an order from a federal judge, which should have allowed the student, at least in one case, to stay, and Border Patrol deported them anyways. So we find out what happened with that case and what's going on with it currently. And at the end, Susan talks about the importance of this upcoming election, and it's really hard to overstate it, I think. You know, I see people get smart with it and say, well, we don't know that any old Democrat will reverse all of these policies. And, you know, Democrats have been bad too on X, Y, and Z. And that's totally true. That's really true. We don't know. Maybe President Buttigieg or President Bloomberg would sort of allow these policies to march forward. Even a President Warren or President Sanders, President Biden, although I think that ship may have sailed. And that's true. I mean, any Democrat who wins is going to need sustained pressure from us, the electorate. So I appreciate that. At the same time, with any of the Democrats, there's at least a chance, right? It's an uncertainty, and there's varying degrees of probability of things getting better. You know, maybe it ranges from a 2% chance to a 98% chance. And we should definitely be fighting right now for the 98% chance. But regardless, there is a chance. On the other hand, if there's a second term, first of all, there might likely be a third term with the way we're going. I mean, I don't think people understand quite how fascistic things are lining up to be. It's bad, folks. And we know what's going to happen if he wins. We got to start organizing, knocking doors, getting involved, donating money, finding out ways to be not spectators, but participants as much as we can. You know, I talk to a lot of people. My clientele are mostly Mexican. A lot of them have been here a lot of years, 20, 30 years, without any possibility of fixing papers, or maybe they're subject to some particular bar, some bad aspect of the law. And a lot of them want to go back to visit. They don't want to go back and stay. Their hometowns are torn up and people are being killed and mistreated. You know, there's all kinds of problems in Mexico, but oftentimes they have a sick or a dying parent that they haven't seen in, you know, literally 10 or 15 years. I get down to see my parents. It's about a 5-hour drive quite often, and I get teary-eyed every time I leave. Right now, if I really wanted to, I could drop everything and drive down there. I can't really imagine what it would be like to have my parents in some rural area a world away, where if I visited them, that would mean I'd be abandoning the family I have here and being forced to choose, right? And so what I've been telling people recently is that they should be patient. Let's wait till November and see what happens. Come November, it's not a guarantee that anything will change, but there's at least a possibility, right? And if things don't change in November, then maybe you reassess, knowing it's going to be at least another 4 years. And it's heartbreaking. You know, just one of these stories would be heartbreaking enough. But there's not one. There's thousands. There's hundreds of thousands. There's millions. There's the dreamers who, again, you look at the uncertainty of not knowing, will I have my work permit moving forward? I've worked hard my whole life to get a decent job and to support my family, and I don't know, at any point the Supreme Court could come down and I could immediately lose my job forever and be forced to work now illegally in some manner, right? And what that means is people aren't buying homes, people aren't getting totally settled. I'm just thinking about my last week, right? Like, the people I've talked to. I had a client in yesterday. She's in removal proceedings, and she has an 11-year-old who is clearly and deeply psychologically affected by just the knowledge of this process and knowing what's going on. And her case has been kicked down the road several times by the immigration court, recalendared. And so literally now for 5 years, she's been almost her entire existence, her living memories are with this looming possibility that things could get really bad for their family. So let's keep these people in mind. They're not abstractions. These are real lives that are affected. And when I hear people say things like, Obamacare or this is no time for half measures, I understand we're also at a primary where it's going to get contentious and people are going to fight for the candidate they want the most. But we've got to be ready to organize and fight for our candidate first and foremost. But, if in the end, maybe it's just too soon to be stipulating this, but we owe it to these people to fight for them, even if it means a half measure. So let's fight for the full measure and reconvene if necessary. So anyhow, if you like the show, check out the Patreon, patreon.com/redirect. You can donate money every month, and that goes to keeping the show alive, paying our producer, who's great. He is Jeremiah Britt, at Jeremiah Britt, Britt, on the Twitter. You can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. Leave a review on iTunes. That always helps. Say something nice, or don't say anything at all. That's what I always say. For some reason, I was more suicidal last year than this year, and I'm not sure if...
Oh, really? I'm back to being suicidal again.
I'm probably rounding into shape, joking, not joking, but for some reason, everything is... I might be too busy to... I don't know. Things are bad.
Yeah, things are really bad, especially because, the Iowa debacle, and there's nobody that appears to be able to beat him, and that's weighing hard.
It seems like maybe you're a Warren person.
I am so in favor of anybody that can beat Trump. I've never been such a pragmatist in my life, but I am.
Right.
And I'm just not convinced she could beat him, although I really loved her. I love her. She's great. I've actually read her immigration plan. I think it is amazing, really.
Yeah, it's so good.
But I'm just not convinced she can beat him. I'm not convinced anybody can. So
yeah, it's it's hard not to get bogged down in the electability thing. I mean, I do feel like I have a sense of a couple of people who could definitely not beat him.
Yeah,
and it seems like we're going that way, which is cool. That's a cool feeling. But anyhow, so you sent me this video, and we have a producer now, so we can edit out whatever you want. You can say...
You have a producer?
You can say whatever.
Oh,
it all gets
Excellent.
beeped. And
good. Why do you beep it, though? You're
not
subject to FCC guidelines, are you?
My mom listens. Bless her heart. My mom.
Are you Southern? You can't use bless her heart like that.
Bless her heart. Now,
that's not, no, the way to use bless her heart, because I was born in North Carolina, is when you're totally dissing the person. It's the court equivalent of, with all due respect, Your Honor. I might have to deal with these dumb dogs.
No, leave the dogs in. I like the dogs.
Stop barking. He barks at every leaf that falls.
He's like the ice version of dogs. Just everything is a terrorist attack. So, how long have you been in Boston?
You mean as a lawyer, or as I ended up going to the last 3 years of my high school in Boston.
Oh, okay.
And my mom is originally from Massachusetts, but I just moved around a lot as a kid. Where are you from, usually?
I'm from Oregon.
So I always feel like Oregon's our sister state.
Oh, really?
I feel like there's so many similarities, except for you have terrible weather. You don't get enough snow, but...
Right, that's true. But I'm curious how high you can turn up the Boston accent, because it'd be fun to just do this.
Oh, I don't have one at all.
Oh, really? You can't even pretend?
I mean, I can do park the car and have a jar, but it's stupid. It's not a good accent.
Right.
Because I never had one. I grew up in the South and in the West, so I never actually fully developed the Boston accent. I had a very thick Southern accent when I was younger, and I used to say, smush the pumpkin, and y'all come back now here, and stuff like that, and umbrella and insurance, but I stopped doing that. Because they tease me. The children tease me so much.
Can you tell me if everyone from the Philly area sounds like Matthew, or is he just has his own thing going on? Because I'm really unfamiliar. We've been doing this 6 years, and I'm sometimes still confused about
by his voice.
What's going on? Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think I know enough Philly people to.
Okay.
The Boston people, though, there's tons of Boston people that have no accent at all. It's really funny.
Right. It sounds like maybe the ones with the accent are faking it almost. Or like,
no, I have a really good friend. It's where you grew up, which part of Boston you grew up. Like if you grew up on the North Shore or the South Shore, it tends to be very, very thick accent.
Interesting. Now, you sent me this video.
This just happened. I feel like it's breaking news, but I had a client whose wife and 2 children came in to the United States in July, right before the asylum ban. And then 2 days later, her son and her husband, they tried to enter, let's just say that. And they somehow got stuck in MPP, even though the wife and kids were not stuck in MPP. It was like right around that time that they implemented it.
Where are these folks from?
They're from Guatemala.
Oh, okay.
And so the son and the husband have been in hiding in Mexico for more than 6 months now. And they were the victims of 2 kidnapping attempts. Once the second one happened, they basically went into hiding at this pastor's house in about 4 hours from the court, and then didn't leave the house essentially almost exclusively for all that time. And it was, there's like another form of family separation. They were completely unable to see each other. And his court case was scheduled for February 18th, his hearing. And, she doesn't even have her NTA filed with the court. Right. So it was going to be this terrible situation where like she may end up getting asylum, whereas he was going to get a removal order. So even if she was able to bring them in on derivative, he would have a removal order. God knows how long. He was probably looking at 6 years or more before they could ever see each other again.
Right. In other words, the wife who was allowed in, even if everything went perfectly, right? A couple years in proceedings, maybe, and then you got to file all the paperwork, and that's another couple of years, sometimes a couple of years.
Right.
And so sort of best case scenario, husband and son are coming back to be reunited, assuming everything goes perfectly in like 5 or 6 years, right?
Right.
Okay, cool. Cool system. Does he know that the thing keeping him in Mexico was called the Migrant Protection Protocols?
Yeah, the Migrant Protection. It's the biggest misnomer of all the misnomers this administration likes to throw around. Yes, he's very, very well-spoken, extremely grateful for what, the ACLU of Mass and our office did for him. And he really wants to help other people in this situation. He's a really nice guy.
So I think we maybe skipped over. How did he end up getting let in? What happened?
So we filed, and I have to give most of the credit on the legal arguments to the ACLU of Mass and Ropes and Gray, because I had been kind of struggling. I'd been speaking to other lawyers trying to figure out what way we could get him here. Maybe we could file a change of venue and change to Boston. Maybe his judge would allow that. Maybe we could do this. Maybe we could file for bond. I know a bunch of lawyers on the border had been filing habeas petitions when the person arrived in court, and those had all been unsuccessful. And so I called the ACLU and I said, is there anything you can do about this case? I don't really have an answer. And Adriana Lefay, who's this brilliant lawyer, said, well, we could sue to reunite them, because we had done the same thing last summer for a family separation client of mine, where the daughter was in a shelter in Texas, but the mom had been released, and they were doing this absurd thing where they were making the mom get her fingerprints retaken again, just ridiculousness. So we filed a lawsuit. The government settled, and they were reunited a month earlier than they would have under the government's plan. So Adriana said, you can use that same sort of jurisdiction this way, because the mom and kids were here and they were keeping her 9-year-old son away from her. And our big fear in filing this lawsuit is, what if the offer of settlement is, we'll give you your son, but not your husband, right?
Right.
What a terrible choice for that family to have to make. Thankfully, the government did not do that. They did the right thing, and they made an offer of settlement on Friday afternoon.
What is the actual legal ground for the lawsuit? Like, what is it based on?
So many of the APA Act claims that have already been litigated in the Ninth were part of it, but one of which was an argument that Adriana Lefay came up, and again, I don't want to take any credit for this because it's brilliant, is that the return to Mexico policy can only be applied to people who are at a port of entry. And our client had come across the border and then been put to MPP. And I feel like that's one of the strongest arguments. There's also APA Act claim and due process and equal protection arguments. But the argument, I don't know what the government was thinking, but I think they were very scared of that regulatory claim making its headway into everybody's legal argument.
Right. Well, It's so awesome. Well, first of all, it's one of those things. It's like a dichotomy where, on the one hand, it's sort of very depressing to see the amount of work that has to go into
Right.
one family and one case.
Family,
And
one case. Exactly right.
And knowing
so
that
awful.
There's tens of thousands of people who
60,000 people now are under MPP.
Right, who don't have, and then every day we're sending other people to Guatemala.
And to the middle of a jungle in Guatemala. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So that's kind of depressing. But on the other hand, it does give you a sense of hope to know that, because you're describing this lawsuit, and I'm just like a dumb guy. I don't even know where you would begin. And it sounds like you're not a dumb lady, but you had a similar sort of feeling. And there are these amazing organizations and attorneys that we can turn to who are ready to help. So it is good.
Yeah, I feel like, I think this is a really important point. People give me a lot of credit. I'm really not a smart lawyer at all. I just know that there are a lot of smart people out there, so I call them. Like, that's what I do. And, I'm like, what do you think about this? And can we do this? And they're like, yes, we can. And, then they get really big law firms involved. And next thing you know, my client is finally reuniting with her family. I really don't think I could ever accomplish these things on my own. But it's important to make these connections. I think this is why Boston in particular is such a great immigration practice area, because a lot of us have relationships with big law firms that will come in and do. Even that Iranian student that I recently represented, again, like that night I was on the phone to ACLU. ACLU was on the phone to Mintz Levin, which is a big law firm in Boston, and they're all willing to help. Because I can't do it on my own. I've got so many clients. Like, it's just who has the time.
Right.
I really like practicing in Boston for that reason, because I feel like our big law firms and our ACLU office is just, the bomb, as they say.
Yeah, and it is good to have that sense of teamwork. I know I had some success on an oral argument about a year ago, getting a case remanded. And the day before the oral argument, I was in Portland on a Sunday. And I reached out to Stephen Manning a couple days before, and he's like one of these really smart people. And I was like, Can you help me? Like, just listen to my argument and, whatever. And I'd been preparing for weeks. And so I go, he agrees to meet me like downtown Portland on a Sunday and, listens to me. And, we didn't meet very long, but his advice like totally restructured my entire oral argument. Literally the day before. And then I got to go in and take the credit for it, like a smart guy. But yeah, it's good to have that sense of working as a team. Now, you were first on the show talking about Muslim Ban. I think it was 1.0, the orig.
Yes. And the worst of all of them, but they're all terrible. But the one that they did the least effective job in creating.
You were one of these people down at the airports as early in the Trump administration, like doing the real dirty work. And I just wanted to have you on because we've solved it all and everything's better.
Yeah.
Nothing else is going on. But you were recently back at the airport. Is that right?
So we had been monitoring this situation with students from Iran being deported, even though they had valid F1 visas. And the first case we heard about was my client, Rehana from Harvard, who had a full scholarship to study overseas in Europe at a very prestigious divinity school, and gave that up to study at an even more prestigious divinity school at Harvard, and also had a full scholarship here. And one of the facts of her story that I love is her parents really wanted her to be an engineer. And students from Iran in particular tend to be highly, highly educated and in the top 1% of their class. And so she compromised with her parents and studied philosophy of engineering for a little while.
Oh, interesting.
And then eventually went into interdenominational religious studies, and particularly the Quran. So we had heard about her getting turned around after a really vicious and really demeaning interview by CBP that went on for 8 hours. It was like a gulag type interview. And we'd started monitoring other people coming in and out of the airport, especially as tensions with Iran heightened over the killing of Soleimani. So we were on a text group, and I was skiing with my daughter. I love skiing. I live for skiing. It's like my biggest passion. She's a teenager. She let me ski with her two friends and her. which I thought was like,
wow, cool mom alert.
I was
Cool
like really
mom.
happy because I'm definitely not a cool mom,
Mm-hmm.
but she loves to excuse me because I can actually keep up with her. I was very happy with that. And then so I get up in the morning and I see a couple of text messages about people not being able to find this kid who had been coming in, and everyone had been texting us their information over the past 2 months when they flew in so that we knew if somebody was not coming out of secondary so we could try to do something.
Are you saying there was some sense, like as of months earlier, that
Yes,
this
since
was
the summer.
that this was something that needed to be tracked?
Yeah, there's something going on in Logan, and we didn't really, later on we found out it's going on around the country, but it seems particularly bad in Logan, because the highest number of removals are from Logan, and all of the Logan people received expedited removal orders. Whereas if you look at the New York Times article, the other people were allowed to withdraw their application for admission, which of course means that you're not subject to the 5-year bar.
Right.
And maybe if this lunatic gets out of office, maybe you have a chance of coming back with some more protection. So anyways, I woke up in the morning and I see all these text messages and I say to my daughter, I'm just telling you now, I'm not getting involved, right? Like it's Monday, it's a holiday. I'm not getting involved. I'm not getting involved. And right. And so I look at my phone at 1:00 because we were leaving the mountain. And I said, all right, I'm not going to get involved, but I'll just call Carrie and see if she and Masa can just draft a complaint maybe. Because by this point in time, we knew he'd been held in secretary and it was still there and that his flight was leaving at 7:45. So that quickly developed into me calling every single person I knew trying to get information because as well as I do, sometimes CBP is well within their legal rights to deport these people. Somebody's got pictures of them supporting Hezbollah on their phone, or somebody's got engagement ring in their pocket and they're getting married to their U.S. citizen spouse and they're coming on a visitor's visa or student visa, right? There's plenty of valid reasons to remove people. So I was just trying to get CBP to give us the information. And because of the travel ban, I had Joe Kennedy's cell phone number.
Oh,
so
nice.
I called Joe Kennedy, Senator Markey's office, called everybody, and their brother called. And my daughter and her friends were so happy because they got to hear like Joe Kennedy on the cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on, my phone's beep. I'm just going to.
You are a cool mom.
Right. So they were like, yay, like Joe Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was great. He called and we got this officer to promise that they were going to give the client our cell phone number and the client would be able to call us. And, oh, yes, Representative Kennedy. Yes, sir. Blah, blah, blah. They never gave our client the phone number. He was never allowed to call us. He was never given access to a phone. They took his phone and they put in his luggage and they deported him. So I get home at like 6:15. And we had sent somebody down to CBP with a G28 saying, hey, here's a G28 for this guy. Tell us what's going on.
And the G28 is like the I'm the lawyer of this person letter. Right.
Right. And in the meantime, Carrie Doyle, who was also the same lawyer who worked on the travel ban with me and the same lawyer who helped draft the travel ban, along with Matt Siegel of the ACLU, she's at her office working with another lawyer named Stephanie Marzuk, who's great, drafting this complaint. And it was based on the complaint that Harvard had filed with my other client, Rehana. They had drafted this complaint. Do you want to hear this? It's kind of complicated.
Yeah, let's go for it.
So kind of the legal theory is, so you know how hard it is to get at these expedited removal orders. They're very difficult to undo.
Right.
And so what we did with Rehana's case is we caught her within the 30-day period, although there's no time period to rescind, but we think CBP kind of follows a 30-day time period. So she filed this request to rescind the expedited removal order. And it was like a 300-page filing with them about all this evidence and how stupid they were.
Which they super definitely read.
Yeah, they super definitely read because within 6 days they denied it. And it wasn't 6 days. It was a little longer than that. But we filed the motion to rescind. Then we filed a complaint in the federal court of mandamus and APA Act claim saying, hey, you need to adjudicate this request to rescind. You haven't adjudicated it yet, right? And that's kind of the trick to get it into federal court. And then you hope that the government will see how unfair this is and somehow talk the agency into settling.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of settling, they denied it. So then we amended our complaint to say, okay, they denied it in an arbitrary and capricious manner. And so that's what's pending on Rehana's case. So we kind of did the same thing in this case where we filed a request to rescind the expedited removal order with CBP and then filed a mandamus AP Act habeas claim in front of the federal judge. So it was a very dramatic moment because we are sitting there at the airport. CBP is absolutely refusing to talk to us, even when I presented at the airport with a G28 saying, I am his lawyer. Let me talk to him. No, the Privacy Act won't let us talk to you.
What?
Well, ironically, they proceeded to leak false information about my client for the next 5 days in the press, but of course they couldn't talk to the actual lawyer and tell the lawyer anything.
We talk on the show a lot about like the dumb little things that aren't dumb. They're actually very meaningful, but like the little tiny things that have changed that don't get any press coverage. And I don't know that CBP was ever great at communicating, but I've noticed in the Trump administration, just like the local offices, and they used to answer the phone at the Northwest Detention Center, for example,
Yeah.
ICE. And now, I mean, they might as well just unplug the phone.
Oh, this is right. And this is what's one of the hardest things that it is to deal with, right?
Right. Just answer the phone and like, let's have a
Yeah.
conversation about like what's going on. But yeah,
I mean, it's just so frustrating because none of this probably we would have sued no matter what. But, in the past, I've called them up and I say, hey, look, I hear you've got so-and-so there and I don't think you have a right to issue expedited removal, but let me hear your side of the story. And then they'll be like, oh, we found this on his phone, or he has a job interview, 3 days after he arrives, or all sorts of stuff like that. Like, okay, they've got immigrant intent in that case. They have every right. And we back off. There's just no need not to talk to people about the situation. It makes no sense. Anyway, so we're like at the airport and we've been told, somebody had told us that his flight leaves at 9. But then a CBP officer came out and said his flight leaves at 7:48 p.m. So poor Carrie was like at the office trying to finalize the filing. Like we're texting her, like, you have to file right now. This plane is going to leave. You have to file right now. She was so annoyed at us. So she finally files it at like 7:30, maybe 12 minutes before the plane leaves. And while that's happening, I'm saying to CBP, you know that the Boston Federal District Court has a 48-hour rule, don't you? Have you talked to legal about your insistence on deporting this kid, even though they have a 48-hour rule and we're telling you a complaint's been filed? And the CBP officer is kind of like, looks like a deer in the headlights at that moment. And he goes, I'll be right back. And he goes and gets legal involved. So this is how we know that they knew that there was a court order involved, because legal was on the phone with them the entire time. We emailed them the complaint, and everything in federal court is served electronically.
Right.
So as soon as the order comes down, which was at 9:28 p.m., they knew the flight did not leave, from what we can tell from the Logan flight information, until like 9:57 p.m., almost 10 o'clock. So it was a half an hour before. We also know because they told me in court the next day that they knew, but their position is that the plane had moved from the gate, so they're not responsible for it.
What?
Which is just not true. They could have taken him off the plane the minute the complaint was filed.
Right. That's like the worst hands are tied argument I've ever heard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a very frustrating day, really, because I announced to everybody the order had issued, it was like, yay, everyone celebrated. And then we went home. We're like, well, why don't we go see him? So we're trying to figure out which holding facility he was at. And Senator Markey's office called us and they're like, the guy got deported, right? We're like, what? What are you talking about? No, CBP told us they took him off the plane. They said they were going to let us see him. And so we were waiting to see him. And then another officer came down and said, no, you can't see him.
But I'm sure he got to come right back, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So what happened after that?
So we went to court the next morning. Judge Stern said, I can't order the country of Iran or France to bring him back, which is, of course, not accurate. So we filed a civil rights complaint against CBP. We're working on a more extensive motion to rescind, which they'll probably also deny. And then we're going to investigate whether or not we're going to file contempt complaints against them, which we probably will, but it's going to take a while.
What is the stated justification? I mean, what is their position?
That's a good question, because they lied to the press that they did not know about the order. But in court on the morning of the hearing, the lawyer for the government told me that she did know about the order, but that the plane had moved from the gate.
No, but I mean, this guy, like you said, plenty of people, good people, not necessarily bad people. come to this country, and at the airport, they're coming on a tourist visa, but the officer finds out your plan is actually to stay, and they get deported.
Right.
And that, as lawyers, we kind of look at it and go, yeah, I mean,
sucks, but it's legal.
It
right.
sucks, but it's legal, and that's the law. And
Right.
and you were maybe actually abusing the visa that
Right.
you'd been given.
Right.
Maybe committed misrepresentation. But you're saying that's not the case. So what was the underlying? It was just sort of like, you're from Iran, and we just killed a guy.
Here's the thing that's really interesting. So one of my favorite facts, quote unquote, about this case is that at least 2 of the Boston removal orders that we've looked at, and it might be 3 of them, have the CBP officer refusing to sign his name, right? He signs his name, but he does it, and I know it's a he because that's the description from the client. It's in a very illegible manner. And instead of writing his name under there, and you know how expedited removal orders have to be approved by a supervisor, there's no identifying information for either the name of the CBP officer or the supervisor.
Okay.
Which shows me that they are, hiding their identity for some purpose, right? Because they know they're not doing this legally. So what their stated reason in the return documents is that immigrant intent. Immigrant intent, as we just talked about, requires them to think that he's going to overstay his visa or abuse the terms of his visa. There's absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. He doesn't have any relatives in the United States. He'd been here before for 2 years studying at UMass Boston and Northeastern. There's no evidence of that. It's just they make this crap up because they can.
And like
because
you said,
this is Trump's America.
And like you said, you've had plenty of other cases where there is immigrant intent and CBP doesn't have any real trouble producing, evidence or at least a narrative, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And the reason why they're pulling this immigrant intent crap is the only grounds for expedited removal are immigrant intent or fraud. And there was no way that they had any fraud. But for both of our clients, by the way, it was immigrant intent. And they're just misusing the statute. And that's what's particularly outrageous. And then the law is so unfair and so difficult to get at that, what are you going to do? Basically, the law is if you go into court, I mean, this is how it's been described. I disagree with this, but that you go into court and the judge says, is this your name? Yes. Are you the same person who's listed in the expedited removal order? Yes. Okay, you're removed. That's basically the way it works.
Yeah. A lot of my clients are confused about expedited removal because they think there's no way I could have been ordered deported. I never saw a judge. But the law actually vests Border Patrol in certain circumstances to issue these orders, and they are virtually impossible to challenge. I had one recently where the client speaks Mom and doesn't speak Spanish at all, and all the expedited removal paperwork says that a CBP officer speaking in Spanish served as the interpreter. And so I filed a request with them.
Oh my God, yeah.
Hey, this seems fundamentally unfair. And she was back in the country, but in withholding only proceedings. So if we could get rid of the old expedited removal, she could qualify for asylum. And they were like, no, not bothering to justify their behavior, or we talked to the officer and this is how it went down. No, it was just sort of we looked at it and we don't think so. I remember during the campaign, Trump went on the Steve Bannon podcast. I think it was Steve Bannon. And
really?
Trump was saying something like, we want immigrants we want the good ones, right? Highly educated or highly skilled.
Yeah, right.
This sort of thing. And Steve Bannon sort of interrupts and says, well, no, actually, even the educated ones bring a sort of cultural differences and they don't assimilate and these sorts of things. And you're really seeing how well that sort of white nationalist thinking has seeped into the administration, because we're keeping out some of the best and brightest people in the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And especially these immigrants. And the thing is, I said this the other day as I was thinking about this, if you don't believe in these students coming to this country to study in our institutions, the best of the best, the brightest people in the world, then you really don't believe in America. You don't believe in a meritocracy, because when they come to our institutions, they teach us as much as we teach them. We learn from them. They learn from us. That is how the world becomes a better place, is through knowledge and education. And it seems to me that Steve Bannon and Donald Trump just don't even believe in that, and their supporters. They don't believe in education. Like, if we don't have education, what do we have as humanity to better ourselves? I really don't know.
I guess in case people are wondering about this, maybe you could mention what the process is like that these folks who have the student visas have already gone through. Because there might be a sense that, like, oh, just there's some foreigners showing up at the airport,
right,
saying that they got into Harvard. And
right. So first, obviously, Harvard gets them, right? Anybody who goes to college gets investigated. There's interviews, there's phone calls, there's background checks by the schools to make sure what you say on your resume is in fact accurate. Then the government vets them. For Rihanna, it involved an in-person interview at the consulate, a background check, and Iranians in particular go through particularly strong background checks. Most people have single entry visas. Our client Shahab had multiple entry visas. And what single entry visa means, they have to renew their visa every time they go back home to their home country. Rihanna had gone through over 4 months of visa background investigation. My understanding is that it involves intelligence, FBI, and State Department investigation. It's not just the State Department.
Right.
For Shahab, he had been investigated for over 9 months after having already studied in the United States for 2 years and 3 entries on his visa. It just makes no sense to me. I know one of the students, it wasn't our students, but one of the students, I read their description in the New York Times, and the exclusion was based on, quote unquote, working for a sanctioned company, but the person worked for the company before sanctions were even instituted, right? Like, just kind of this nonsense where CBP's making stuff up and then excluding people, undoing all the work of the State Department.
Yeah.
And we think they're doing it by Googling, right? Or they've got some list or something. Like, they keep claiming there's no directive, but there has to be a directive. Or they're just like Googling sanctioned companies and figuring out if you're on that list, and Googling your name and seeing if you've ever been tagged on Twitter in something they don't like. This is
but even
insane.
Even the State Department now, when you apply for a visa, they ask for all your social media handles. And I mean, presumably all of that stuff would have already been investigated.
Oh, no, you require, of course, you have to put all your social media handles there. You have to upload your social media to the visa application electronically.
Yeah. Anyways, it's crazy. Do you have any information about, because last week we recorded, and every Friday there's some dumb new thing that happens after we record. And last week it was another sort of Muslim ban.
Right. The one that just came down for the majority African companies, and then countries, and then Kyrgyzstan and Eritrea, I think.
Have you guys been involved at all in any movement on that?
No, definitely not yet. That is more like Muslim Ban 3 than Muslim Ban 1. So thankfully people are not kind of stuck midair the way that they were during the first visa ban, the first Muslim ban. So it's a slower process to challenge it in this situation. You need to find a plaintiff.
Right. I was reading that I think it's Nigeria's on the new list.
Yes, Nigeria's on the list, right.
They're among the most educated immigrants that come to this country.
Yeah, second most in the country, right.
And so at the same time, we're saying, well, immigrants need to be self-sufficient, and you need to now file your credit scores and all of this information to make sure that you are able-bodied and able to support yourself. We're also saying, like, oh, you're a doctor or a dentist or, a surgeon from Nigeria. Sorry. Like that's also not good enough.
Right. Because you know what a shortage of doctors they have in rural areas?
Oh,
It's intense. And a lot of those doctors are from Iran, actually. A lot of them do their 2 years in the rural areas to qualify for a visa,
right.
For a green card. I don't do any of that business stuff, but that's like the one factor I know.
Right. Well, Susan, thanks for being a cool mom, first and foremost. And
I'm way more proud of that than anything else, actually.
Right. And, you said earlier you were sort of self-deprecating, but I think you're smart, and happy to have you on the team. Keep up all the good work. And thanks for coming on to talk about what's going on here. What if there's people who are like outraged by this and they want to do something? what is the best way to channel the sort of sad rage that we're all feeling?
They really have to start organizing for the election. That is, everybody's energy and money needs to be focused on the election. And I don't care who they put up there as Democrats, just put somebody up and let's run them. We've got to win this election, because I don't think a lot of us are going to survive if we don't. Our clients are not, and then maybe we're not either.
Right. I totally agree. Not hyperbole.
Yeah, really.
All right, Susan, thank you for coming on, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, thanks for having me. Take care. Thanks
Bye.
for your podcast. I love your podcast. It's excellent.
Thank you. Have a good
one.
Bye.